So let's review kind of where we've been going over these last few sessions. The concept of the skills. Remember, we're going to talk about now how connection, emotional connection, and attachment comes first. And yet, once you and I have that, if we can then learn some very practical skills, if we can begin to master some of the details that actually makes marriage work, we can have a much more successful relationship. However, if we focus first and foremost just on skills, just on actions and activities, behaviors, attitudes, habits, apart from an actual love and connection from one another, those skills really are not going to be useful in making us have a meaningful connection. It's just simply going to let us have a more peaceful divorce, which sometimes that's important too. But it's heart first, so it's emotional connection first, and yet in what we've been doing in these sessions now is more the mental work of what are the actual skills we need to learn to understand how to operate. And so things like communication, things like understanding how to manage a household, career, all those things fall in to what's taking place, emotional regulation. And so tonight in this session, we're going to talk first about money. In the next section, we're going to talk about intimacy. And then we have time for some Q&A, so you can text your questions in to marriage to 56316. So whenever we think about money, I want us to first think about this, that anytime we have stress on our relationship, it reveals any cracks that might be in the foundation. And so you take this stage alone. This stage, let's say hypothetically, this stage was barely standing up, but without any weight and pressure upon it, it would look totally normal. And yet if there's any crack in the foundation, whenever I stand upon it, my weight then reveals anything within it that isn't strong and steady. Money, in my opinion, is so often an additional stress that reveals any crack that could possibly be in the foundation. And while I understand that money is difficult in so many ways, and so much of it is our backgrounds and our families and our experiences, and you can have things like inheritances, and some have had a much tougher lot in life, and others have been handed so many things, and so it comes in from such radically different angles. But in the end, money is a skill. It is a set of behaviors, of activities, of actions that you learn in order to handle. Now, what that means, I talk about this all the time, of imagine it being now a window of possibility. And so the question now is, how can you get to the very top of your window of economic possibility? That still might be far lower than somebody who started way up here, has been given all these things. But all of us, no matter who we are, where we are, in this country, with the opportunities that we have, there's a window. And how can we learn to get to the very top of that window to lessen the stress as much as we possibly can? Life is hard enough. Do not add extra stress to it. And when you and I fail to learn the skills necessary to handle our finances properly, it adds stress to marriage, which can complicate things. So here's the thing about finances. Finances are extremely complex and yet very simple. So we're living in between this tension. So they're complex. You come from different backgrounds and experiences, different economic windows and understandings. There is basically a concept that some people can learn very early on because of where they were born and the families in which they were born, to handle resources, to be given so many more resources than anybody else. And it's unfair. There's global situations that are taking place, things in our jobs that we don't control in any way. All those things are true, and it's complex. But it's also very simple. How much are you bringing in? How much is going out? And your choices are basically this. If you have a lifestyle that costs a certain amount and you aren't bringing that in, you can either find a way to make more money or find a way to spend less money. It's that simple. Now, I recognize it doesn't mean it's easy, but the concepts are pretty simple. Now, here's one thing that we have to remember whenever it comes to finances. It's not what you know, it's what you do. So I can often sit with couples and talk to them, And one of the spouses might be able to rattle off where the stock market is today and what the latest philosophies are and how to invest in that and how to invest in that. They know a lot, but they aren't actually doing the things that need to be done. It doesn't really matter how much you know in something like this as much as what are the behaviors and activities that you do. So John Gottman talks about, he narrows major fights down to 5 topics. You can see them there. So it's sex, it's parenting, it's money, drugs and alcohol, and in-laws. He said most couples, the fights that they have can be narrowed down to those 5 things. And what makes it interesting is it's the money fight that most predicts divorce. You want to know why that is? Me too. I don't know. I don't know. You would actually expect a little bit more of the drugs and alcohol conversation to lead to divorce. But it could be what's happening there is you have drugs and alcohol tends to be more an avoidant behavior, avoidant maybe in relationship with anxious, and so they have that negative cycle that takes place in the relationship, but often in an avoidant, anxious kind of relationship, nobody's actually willing to end the relationship. Avoidant, anxious relationships only end generally when the anxious person has finally had enough, and they've rarely had enough. And so it could be that that's the reason. That's really not the major issue. I don't understand why it is that money is the leading indicator, but it is something to be aware of. If you look in your relationship and this is your number one fight, it doesn't mean you need to give up by any means. Instead, it means you need to take this situation seriously and maybe get professional help. Maybe look at a class like financial piece. I tend not to use the Ramsey kind of model, but we do it here, and it's great. It's been very meaningful to many people. I use a different model. The guy who wrote, it's Ramit Sethi. He wrote the book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He has a podcast. Recognize he's not a Christian, but he has some brilliant stuff of what's going on. But it doesn't matter necessarily what you do as much as you get on a track and a plan to figure out what to do. But notice this, whenever it comes to disagreements, it's much more about how couples fight about money. That is the bigger issue than the money itself. In most cases, money is not about money. You've heard me tell the story before. It's one of my favorite stories of all time. The spouse who was involved in the story was highly embarrassed whenever it first happened. I try to reassure them there's no reason to be embarrassed at all. This is one of my favorite things ever. And that is, spouse goes here, husband does not. They're having money issues. They ask if I can talk with them. I'd say, be more than happy to. I sit down with them. And the husband, now not knowing me, sits down and says, what are your credentials? And the wife is embarrassed. I'm not. I think it's a great question. You don't know who I am. Why are you about to bare your soul to me when you don't know who I am? And I said, look, very clearly, I'm not a marriage counselor. I play a marriage expert on the internet. I'm a pastor. I had some undergrad classes in psychology, no doubt, and graduate classes as well. I've read a great deal. I'm just a triage nurse. I'm just going to listen to what's going on, give my opinion, and then point you in the right direction. But I think I can be helpful. And so I just began to ask what's happening. And nearly every day they would fight about money. And he was retired. She was still working, and she would get home, and they would fight about money. I'm just listening. And about 10 minutes in, I finally said, hang on. Here's what I think might be going on here. You're home all day. You don't see anybody. You're lonely. She's at work. As the day comes to an end, you're looking forward to having somebody around and her coming home. But the marriage is tense. Who wants to go home knowing a fight's about to happen? So she finds reasons to go do other things, family and church and other responsibilities, which frustrates you. And so now she's gone even longer, you're lonely even longer. That kind of builds up. So whenever she finally gets home, you don't know how to say, I'm lonely, I've missed you. Instead, you do know how to say, hey, I was looking at the bank account, because actually when she doesn't show up, you go to look at where she's spending money, and that gives you something to talk about, so that whenever she walks in, the first thing you say is, we don't have any money. Why'd you spend this money here? You now walk in as the spouse feeling totally attacked. Why did you even want to come home to this to begin with? That's why you were out for a while, not coming home in this moment. And what's really going on right here is not money. What's really going on here right now is you're lonely and you can't communicate it. I said, what have I said here that's wrong? He said, nothing. I said, and that's my credentials. And I loved it, by the way. I thought it was hilarious, right? But it made the point. Sometimes our marriages can feel so complex. But if you just take one step, and I get to be one step removed, we can see what the actual issues are. So you need to want to ask yourself now, whenever you have a discussion, and this becomes a repeated theme, is this really about money or is it about attachment? In other words, as we're looking at through the whole skills curriculum here, all right, the skill is money. So we're talking about money. We're talking about the practical issues. Okay, but before we get into the details, let's dig deeper. Do we feel emotionally connected at this moment? If we do not, start there. And then begin to move into the details of what's going on financially. But so often what is taking place is we feel an emotional disconnect, but rather than discussing that, we start talking about this whole financial situation. Y'all are getting nervous from my voice. I can feel it. I know. It's those white trees out there that are no fun whatsoever. So ask yourself about the actual attachment. So here's a money myth I want us to just get rid of tonight. It's the saver-spender myth. You have been told at some point in your marriage by somebody who claimed to be a marriage expert who knew nothing more than what I know, that in every relationship there is a saver and a spender. It's a lie. Within the heart of every single human being, there is a saver and a spender. I want to save on things I don't want to spend money on. I want to spend on things I don't want to save on, and that lies within me. And here's what so often happens. Let's go gender stereotypes for a moment. Many times, she's having to spend to kind of keep the household running. Many times what happens is she spends in small ways, he saves and then spends in big ways. And they're actually both spending and both saving. But whenever you look at the number of transactions, she has so many more than he does. But if you look at the actual money spent, oftentimes he's spending more than she does. And yet we get in this false dichotomy of there's a saver and a spender. Now, there's no question that we do have these certain bents whenever it comes to everything, and finances being one of them. But that whole discussion of who's the saver, who's the spender, generally is not a productive discussion. The question is, as a couple now, how can we figure out a pathway that we can accomplish what it is that we want to accomplish, that we can actually spend the money that we want to spend and make our dreams come true, while at the same time saving for big ticket items, for emergencies that are going to be there, and for what retirement is actually going to be. How can we get on the same team and then begin to move forward? So that resides within both of us. And then to recognize that our non-secure attachments can create very foolish spending. And so if you have a primary anxious attachment, if you're struggling to emotionally connect with your spouse, you will begin to fill that, if you're not careful, with other tangible things. You've heard me say it before, that the average life insurance policy is spent within 6 months. Now, why is that? It's because the spouse is grieving and there isn't that other person there. And so human nature is, I talk about this in Fearless Families, human nature is we need some tangible connections. And whenever we can't safely make a relational connection with another human being, our tempter then tempts us with these materialistic things. And a good amount of our materialism is nothing more than an internal loneliness that we don't know how to properly fill. And so if you're anxiously attached, if you feel that other person running away from you, you are then tempted, if you're not very careful, to go out and purchase things in order to calm yourself. So unable to emotionally regulate yourself, you then turn to a coping mechanism to use other things to cope for yourself, and then that can be destructive. Well, if you have a more avoidant attachment style, first of all, you're in all likelihood willing to avoid the tough conversations about money. So you'll find a way not to have the discussion about how you're spending, about how somebody else is spending, about what your goals are, about what sacrifices you're going to make. You're so nervous about any possible tension that you'll avoid the conversation altogether. Also, if you have an avoidant attachment style, you're far more likely just to live in denial. And so if you're over 40 and in this room, and and don't have a lot of retirement out there, I would ask the question, do I have a primarily avoidant attachment style? Because it empowers us to avoid the big, intimate issues and just keep on living, hoping that one day we're going to win the lottery, or my hope is that somebody will hand me the ticket that won the lottery, because I don't play, but sometimes, sometimes pastors, people do that kind of thing. I'm not saying, just saying, right? So to actually look at your attachment style would be an interesting approach as you get into the concept of looking at our finances. So let's just look at some very simple pathways forward, and then you can look at this within your own life. So here's a basic plan. First is to understand what money means to you and to your spouse. So this is a defining of terms. I think, by the way, there needs to be a whole vocabulary of us. There needs to be a glossary whenever we get married of what do terms actually mean. You've heard me talk about it before. I think we talked about it the first night. Of what does the word vacation mean? Are we going to go lay on a beach and do nothing? Or are we going to go somewhere where you're planning every minute of activity so we miss nothing? What does Saturday, yeah, there you go. I'm not vacationing with you. What does Saturday morning mean? Is it chores or is it rest? We need to define what these actual things have names for a reason, but we have to define what they are. Money, what does it mean to you? Well, for some, what money means is opportunity. If I have money, I can buy this thing, I can get this ticket, I can have this experience. There's so much opportunity. If I could get more money, there would be more opportunity. That's a very legitimate approach. Well, imagine if your mindset is money is opportunity, and then you're married to somebody who their first thought of money is it's safety, it's security. If I have money, I know where the next meal's coming from. I don't have to worry about what retirement is going to be like. I know the bills are going to get paid. It's just a peace. If I have money, money equals peace. Well, now we're talking about the exact same thing. We're talking about money, but one sees it as opportunity and the other sees it as security. You're going to approach decisions in a radically different way. Now, whenever we love each other well, those two things can play off of each other in a powerful way to help the person who sees it as opportunity, maybe to save a little bit more, to have the person who sees it as security, to have fun, to risk it a little bit more. For others, they see money as power. I want money so this other person doesn't have power over me. One of my favorite books, I think it's a Jewish writer. I read a lot of people who aren't Christian. I figure I got the Christian part. I want their expertise. So James Altura, I don't think that's how you say his name, but he's not here and he doesn't know. The book is called Choose Yourself. And what happened is one day he went into his office and he got laid off. And he made a decision at that moment, I will never again have my future dependent upon one person choosing me. I'm going to choose myself. And so for him, he saw money as power. That because he was having to work for somebody else, he didn't have power. He wanted to have power, so he went out and created a career where he would make money so he wouldn't be dependent upon anybody else. Well, if you see money as power, that's different than seeing it as safety or different as seeing it as opportunity. You might see money as a pathway to happiness, as joy. So you're going to see money as this thing that we now leverage for our own enjoyment. Well, those are all different things. None of them are right or wrong. They're all probably just somewhat incomplete, left to your own devices. And so it's an opportunity now to see that whenever your spouse sees it in a different way than what you see it, their perspective isn't wrong, your perspective isn't wrong. How can we merge these together in the most healthy way to then move forward? But if you never define it, you're not really going to know how to meet each other's needs. And notice this. If you are in a loving, healthy relationship, the way your spouse defines money now is one of the leading way indicators of how you're going to decide that you want to spend money. You see, it's not about, oh, I see it as opportunity, so I'm going to force my way to make sure we see money as opportunity. It's not that. It's, okay, I'll find ways to create opportunity. Oh, this is safety for you because maybe you grew up and you didn't know where the next meal was going to come from, or you saw how your parents were so stressed over making rent and all those things. I see how important this is to you. I'm now going to value why this is so vital to you because I care more about my connection with you than I do about the actual money. In an unhealthy relationship, it is, I'm going to fight for my way. And that's why the emotional connection is far more important than anything else. So you're going to understand what money means to each other, and then you're going to make a plan to give, save, and spend. I feel somewhat foolish standing on this stage and teaching this because this is the exact same thing I taught my kids when they were 4 and 5. But it's the exact same thing I have to look in the mirror and remind myself of on a regular basis. You have to make it, obviously. Maybe we should have included that in there. So you have to have income in some way. But once you get that income, then all right, we're going to give at least 10%. We're going to be generous. We're going to save. And then whatever's left over, we're going to spend. And the faster you can get into that process, the faster you can get away from, we're going to spend, we're going to save, and then we're going to give, and get into we're going to give, we're going to save, we're going to spend in that order, the easier your life actually becomes. And isn't it amazing? People ask all the time, all right, the tithe, we can talk about the tithe all day long, but why would God want us to be generous? In part, is it possible that if you and I learn from a very young age to live off of 90% of what we're taking in, it actually becomes easier to live off of 85% and 80%. But if we learn from the get-go to spend 100% of what we bring in, it becomes very easy to slip into spending 105% and 110%. And so I don't think it's any accident that one of the greatest problems in our country today, individually, corporately, in communities, and definitely as a country, is our addiction to debt. And we have the opportunity to show a different way because we're going to value things, because first and foremost, it's about emotional connection more than all these other things. Think about this. If you feel emotionally connected with your spouse, and that makes you less likely to seek an unhealthy connection with materialistic things, less likely now to go into foolish debt for things that aren't necessary. It begins to lighten the stress on all these things, and you're living in a different way. And so it does come down to, this is the simplicity of it. We're going to give, we're going to save, we're going to spend. And how do we get into that model? And then, so you're going to understand it, you're going to create a plan, and then you're going to get to work, and you're going to let time work. What is it that Warren Buffett says that the greatest idea ever invented is the idea of compounding? That if you save $1 today and it earns 10 cents in interest, now you're earning interest off $1.10. Do you know that Warren Buffett made 85% of his wealth after the age of 65? Why? It's because he had all this long time of investing, and the compounding just began to take over. And I think it's something like $90 billion after the age of 65. That if you look at what his net worth was at the age of 65, it wasn't that impressive in today's numbers. It's just compounding. Well, here's the thing about compounding. That's not just a financial principle. It's a principle in every area of life. And so if you will begin to grow in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, if you'll begin to grow in that, as you love more, you become more joyful. And as joy grows, it gives you more peace. And as you have peace, it then empowers now a kindness, which instills a faithfulness, which creates a kind of goodness, self-control. And as you have more self-control, it allows you to love more, which creates more joy. And there's actually a compounding effect. This is why I love you. I love you as your pastor. But the question that is keeping me up at night right now is how can we get couples in their 20s and 30s in rooms like this? Because the faster they learn these things, the greater the return on investment is going to be. That if they start learning how to communicate and how to have healthy emotional attachments, and they start learning how to handle their money and how to deal with intimacy issues in a proper way, how to emotionally regulate now, if they start learning the skills, imagine how much easier their marriages can be. Why are you in this room right now? It's because for 20 years you struggled with these things. And now you know. Well, they don't know yet. How can we help them know? But here's the great news. Compounding starts whenever you start. And so while you may not have learned some of these things as early in life, I mean, it's the thing I hear the absolute most around here. Man, I wish we would have known you 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Okay, I get it. I mean, I don't think I would have been helpful to your marriage 40 years ago. I was 6. I was trying, but I was 6. But all right, you wish it would have been. I get it. But hey, you're here right now. And this is something as we live in the age of the great divorce, where couples are divorcing. If instead of divorcing now at 50 and 60, if they would now start doing the work, then that would actually set them up for a very successful decade of the 70s and into the 80s. And they're going to be far happier now to create that marriage that they've long had, to make that a happy marriage. They're going to be far more satisfied than to actually start over. So don't downplay the power of compounding. So a couple closing principles here, and then we'll have some discussion. The first is this: all money is our money. I don't care who earns it. I don't care how it's earned. I don't care any of those things. It is not his paycheck, her paycheck. All money is our money. It's all the same thing. Now you can practically in your system say, hey, every month in our budget, he gets to spend this amount and she gets to spend that amount, and that's what you've negotiated out and it works for you. That's totally fine. And there are scenarios in which I would actually encourage different bank accounts. If one of you struggles with addiction, if one of you struggles with a past history of spending and not being able to curtail some of these habits, it's very possible that you have to create a separate bank account, that's the only one you have access to, and money is put into there. But outside of that, everything goes in the same accounts. The names are all together. There's no secrets. One of you might take care of it more than the other. That's fine. However you work that out, it's fine. But there's no secrets. It's all ours. Financial unfaithfulness is just as dangerous as sexual unfaithfulness. So whatever your number is that you have to seek the opinion of the other to spend, and every couple should generally have that idea. I remember when Jenny and I first got married, we were in seminary, it was $100. We did not spend more than $100 without consulting the other. I don't think I can fill up my car for $100. That number has changed. But there is still a general understanding that before we spend certain amounts, that hey, let's check in with each other. Let's make sure on the big picture of what's going on that we're in agreement here. Every couple should have those general guidelines. And then once you have that, you recognize if you spend without getting the advice or the consent of the others, that's cheating. That's cheating. And it erodes the trust. And you can justify it in your own mind of, oh yeah, well, I get that that's cheating. That's not nearly as bad as doing something over here sexually. Okay, maybe anything that erodes trust is dangerous. And that financial unfaithfulness is just bad. I can't tell you how many times I've sat preparing the funeral with the widow to hear one of the children say, hey, Mom, why do you have this loan for $30,000? And she's like, we don't have a loan. Yeah, you do. It's First National Bank. Well, we never banked at First National Bank. We were always at Second National Bank. It's like a Baptist church, right? And the son's like, nope, here it is. And it was for the boat. or it was for the education, or it was for whatever, but one spouse didn't tell the other and death revealed it. That then heaps grief upon grief in the same way as though a boyfriend and a girlfriend have been revealed. Now, don't use that to justify going out and having an affair. That's wrong too. That's kind of how whenever I get the email on eat this, not that, and it says, the average Caesar salad is the equivalent of 2 Snickers. And I read that and go, oh, I can have 2 Snickers. It's like eating a salad. Doesn't work that way. Finally, money is a great tool, but a horrible God. And the fact is that for all of us, we live under the temptation of worshiping money. That's true of individuals, it's true of corporations, it's true of churches, true of countries. And so we have to discipline ourselves. This is what Fearless Families has 2 chapters about, is just the concept of how are we going to protect ourselves from materialism, from the danger of materialism. And yet at the same time, we have to recognize that money, while it can't buy happiness, money done right can be a tremendous blessing to us and to others as well.